Hi there, I'm Trish from TrishNewbery.com and welcome to the Sew Along. So this is our first pattern from my new extended size range, which is called Tempo. So the good news about this range is the sizes go higher but they don't go lower. So I'll still be putting out the TND patterns, but this is just for an extended upper range in response to feedback I've had. So this top today is sewn in a woven fabric. I'm using a silk cotton. So you could use quite a range of lighter summer weight fabrics. If you like a sheer look and you want to layer this, you could use a chiffon, a polyester chiffon, or even a silk chiffon. You could use, I'm using a silk cotton, but you could use a linen. So there's quite a rayon, all sorts of fabrics you could use. I've detailed them all in the fabric listing. The main thing is you do need to be able to gather it. So the seam allowances today are 1 centimetre, which is 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to use mainly my plain sewer, but when I tidy my seams, my hems, I'm going to use an overlocker. You could use a zigzag. On my overlocker I'm only going to use 3 threads. I'm going to use my left looper and my 2 lower loopers, just because I like the wider look. Whatever you want to do is fine. So let's just get started by working on the facing. Here are my facing pieces, and the first thing you need to know is to fuse them on the back. I haven't specified fuse. You need to choose fuse which is appropriate to your fabric type, and your fabric shop should be able to help you with that. So go ahead and fuse the back facing and the front facing. Heat, pressure and time, never use steam. And when you're ready, what we're going to do is place these pieces right sides together, and we're going to sew this shoulder seam. I'm not going to serge the edges before we begin. So just place those right sides together, and we're sewing a 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam across both sides. Right, so when you've done that, go to your iron and press that open. Now, before I go any further, when we do sew pieces like this together and the angles are different, what you need to make sure of is the very edges match at the sew line. So we're not matching this raw edge here, we're matching approximately 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch down. So when we're finished, what we're looking for is this nice transition without any great big dips there. Alright, so go to your iron and press that, and we can move on. So here I am at my serger, my overlocker, and to tidy the raw edges up, I'm just using 3 threads. There's no need to use 4 unless you really want to. And because I like the wider look, I'm using my left and my 2 lower. Right, so the edge we are tidying up is this outside edge, and because this is a V-neck, it's a good idea to start from the edge of the V, and we're just going to go all around the outside. Now, of course, if you don't have an overlocker, you can use a zigzag stitch, or you could even probably just turn that under and plain stitch it. It's entirely up to you. Right, so now put that aside somewhere safe and we'll work on the rest of the garment. We're now going to overlock tidy the centre front piece. Now there's 2 sides of the front. We've cut a pair, 2 mirrors, one this way and one this way. So what you need to do, it can be a little hard to identify it, but if you hold the piece right side up and you've got this sort of curved part, that's the underarm, this long part is the shoulder, and here's the V-neck. So the seam we need to tidy up is this short one here. So we're not cutting any fabric off when we tidy that, just tidy it on the edge. And don't forget to do the other side. So I've just managed to delete the video I just did, but what I've done is I've placed those pieces right sides together along the edge we just serged, and I've sewn a seam here at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, and we are now going to go to our iron and press that seam open like so. We're now going to sew the shoulders, so place that piece you've just sewn right side up. So here's the seam I've just sewn, here's my shoulder, and here's the V-neck. So this piece is right side up. I'm going to take the upper back and place it right side down on top of it, and we're going to match the shoulder seams. So we're going to sew down the shoulder on each side at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. There is a notch to match part way down. I'm going to do the other side. I always like to sew from the neck towards the wrist, but it's entirely up to you. Okay, so now we're going to go and tidy that rear edge. I'm going to use my overlocker serger for that. What I'm going to do here is overlock serge those 2 layers on the shoulder from the neck towards the wrist line. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my iron and I'm going to press that seam so it faces towards the back. Now we're going to sew the neck facing into place. So take your garment and place it right side up. So here's my neckline here. And take your facing and place it right side down on top. So we have right sides together. What we're going to do now is we want to match the shoulder lines, and it's a good idea to pin that in place. We want to match that shoulder line exactly. And then at the centre back you'll have a teeny notch to match to the centre back. Make sure that matches. Is a tad difficult to see. Oh, there it is there. So we're going to match that to there and hold that in place. And then at the front what we want to do is just make sure that V-neck is in the correct, that V of the V-neck is in the correct position. We want to hold that into place. So I'm just pinning through the seam line at the moment. Okay, so it really doesn't matter where you start sewing from. I'm just going to start from shoulder. Maybe just one side of the shoulder. So what we're going to do is stitch these pieces together. We're going to stitch them with a 6mm, 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now if you struggle with that, You can sew them with a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowance and then just trim back the excess. It's really up to you. It is designed for 6mm, 1/4 inch, but see how you go. And follow that all the way around back to your starting point. Don't forget to back tack. Now when we get to the centre front, you want to have a nice V shape, so try and stop with your needle down right where the seam is underneath. Now when you get there, stop with your needle down in your work, lift, turn and pivot, and then reposition your work and keep sewing. Now we're going to do what's called pin stitching. Some people call this understitching, and the idea of it is to help this roll towards the inside of the garment. But the very first thing we need to do is remove any pins you have left, and we just need to cut a very small snip towards our V. So we want to cut it down. Just leave a teeny bit of space. We don't want to cut through the stitching, we just need to leave enough to turn. Right, so when we have done that, what we're going to do is turn this over like so. And we're going to start from one of the shoulders. So the idea of this is we're going to stitch on the facing side, but we want to stitch through all the layers. So place your garment like this and then turn this over. So all the bulk should be on the facing side. And the width we want to stitch at is pin width. And pin width is literally the width of a pin. So I'm just going to use my presser foot to follow the line down and create that line of stitching. Some of you may find it easier to start and stop at the V. Right, so I'm going to stop 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch before the V. Just back tack there. And I'm also going to come through here and start again exactly the same distance from the V on the other side. Now you certainly could start stitching from the V and do this around to the other side. I sometimes get a bit, if I do it this way, what happens is I can get distances wrong from the V when I start and finish. I don't know why it happens that way, but I just prefer not to. But some of you might prefer to do it that way. So in a moment we're going to go to our iron and press it into place, but what will happen is if you turn that facing to the inside now, and this is the centre front of my neckline here, what you will see is this naturally forces the fabric to the inside, and that's how we want to press it. We want to press it so that it looks like that. As a design feature, I'm going to stitch this facing down. Now, if you don't like the idea of top stitching and you're quite happy with a loose facing, what you can do is just stitch in the ditch through the line here on each side. But what I'm going to do is stitch, and I'm going to stitch from the right side. If you found it easier, you could just stitch from the wrong side, and you want to aim to stitch in that overlocking line. I like the effect of the stitching from the right side of the fabric, but I acknowledge this can be a bit challenging for some people, and all I'm doing is I can feel the overlocking underneath, and I'm just going to stitch through that overlocking line. As well as that, I'm just going to use a small screw as a guide, because I know that width is around about 4 centimeters. It's just short of it, which is where the overlocking would be. So I'm stopping directly on the stitch line here with my needle down. I'm going to lift, turn and pivot and just continue up the other side. Right, so it's a good idea to go to your iron and give that another press. What that does is just embed those stitches nicely into your fabric. Now I'm changing the construction method up a little bit from what I would normally do. I just think the way we're going to do it now will be a little easier for those of you who aren't very confident with gathering. This should make it a little bit easier. Alright, so let's start on the lower back. So the lower back is basically a rectangle, and the very center of one of the sides, the long sides, you will have a notch. You won't have one on the other end. The side with the notch is the upper side. So just mark that so you know where that is. Halfway between there and the side is another notch. And when you locate that, put a pin there or mark it somehow, and that's just to help us match our gathers to the upper part of the back. And we have one on the other side as well. This is just to make sure our gathers end up nice and even. So you should have 3 pins on one side of the long side of the rectangle. This is the side that we're going to run our gather thread on. The easiest way I've found to run a gathering thread is to take your thread and just extend a line around about 10 centimeters, so 4 inches, like so. Then, with your stitch length, make it longer than normal. So mine's normally set around about 2.5. I'm just going to up it to about 3.5. Now I'm not going to start stitching on the very edge, I'm just going to come in slightly, so maybe 6mm, 1/4 inch, and I'm going to stitch a line at 1 centimeter. Now be careful where your pins are, you might need to take them out, but just pop them back in again afterwards. And at the far end, when you stop the same distance. So if you used 6mm, use that again, and then make sure you pull a line out again 10 centimeters, 4 inches. Now if you've been taught to gather a different way, you just do whatever you are comfortable with. My ways are only suggestions, they're not hard and fast rules, it's just ways that I've found that works for me. Okay, so now when we gather a thread we only want to pull it from one side. For this I'm going to pull it from the right side, so find the right side thread on one end and gently draw that in. Now this isn't a particularly tight gather, it's just a nice gather, so it's not too much fabric hanging around. Okay, and then come to the other end and do the same thing. Right, so before you go too much further, don't forget to set your stitch length back to what it was before. Right, so now take the body of your garment and we're going to find the back edge. So take the body of your garment, and the back edge is the long straight one. Place that right side up. Now I'm also going to mark the notches on this, so we have 3 across there that we're going to match into the notches on our gathered side. Okay, so our back is now right side up, and we're going to place our lower back right side down. So what we're going to do now is we are going to match. It's a good idea to start at the center, and we need to evenly distribute those gathers. So as you can tell here, I need to just draw the gathers up a teeny bit more. So I'll just do that from the side seam closest. There's a number of ways you can do gathers. Gathers on the overlocker are really easy as well. I do have a video on my YouTube channel if you prefer to do your gathers that way. Okay, so that's pretty close now, so I'll match those notches. And now we just need to gather up that last bit, and the little edge will match there. It doesn't have to be perfect at this stage, but it needs to be reasonably close. You can certainly do a lot of the adjusting as you sew. Just make sure when you do draw up that thread, redraw up that thread, that you are pulling it from the correct side, the same side, always the same side. Alright, so now we're going to sew this together. So I'm a great believer in never removing my gathering thread. So when I stitch, even though I'm going to stitch at 1 centimetre, I'm going to try and just stitch just to the side of the gathering thread so that it's enclosed in the seam allowance. So let's just start, match that raw edge at the sew line. Just sew a couple of stitches just to hold that in place. It just acts like another pair of hands. Alright, so let's make sure our first notches match and just adjust that gather so it's nice and even. And this is the reason why the gathers are quartered off, is just to make it a little bit easier as we sew to adjust. Okay, so we're going to sew across to just before our notch. Okay, so take out that pin, find the next notch, just adjust those gathers nice and evenly. And just repeat until we get to the other side. Right, so if you feel the need to, you can certainly go take out your gathering thread now. If not, we'll work on the front. For the lower front piece, it's a very similar process, except the upper edge is the edge with the high curve on it. So you'll find a notch at the very peak here, and then a notch equidistant either sides, we're going to extend our stitch length, make it longer than normal. We're going to take a length of thread and we're going to stitch at 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch. Put your stitch length back to normal. Decide on which side you'd like to draw the thread from. Okay, so when you're ready, take your garment, place it right side up, and we're working on the front this time. So locate the notches on the lower edge of the front. Now we're only going to have 2 because we're going to match our middle notch to the seam. So this is my front right side up, and I'm taking the lower front and I'm placing that right side down so we have right sides together, and I'm going to match those positions. Alright, so now we need to go to our overlocker and overlock tidy this raw edge on both the front and the back. So I'm going to use my overlocker to tidy that edge. Just be a little bit careful when you're doing the front because it does come up and go down. It curves and you just want to make sure you don't accidentally catch any of the fabric in it from the body of the garment. So just take it slowly. And you might need to just use that blade to trim off a little bit more fraying of the fabric than you normally do. Now, whatever you do, do not iron. Don't iron ruffles. It flattens them. We don't want them flat. We want them fluffy. Do not iron these. If you need to iron your gathers, use the iron this way so that it goes up to the tip, but don't ever squish the area down that you have spent all that time making look nice and full. Now let's work on the side seams. So we're going to fold our garment so it's right sides together, and we're going to sew from the sleeve through this curve, through the seam we just sewed, down to the hemline here. And we're going to do that on both sides. Now when you match the underarm points, as we come to that waist seam, that seam we sewed with the gathers, just make sure that seam faces towards the hemline. And we want to make sure the seam lines match on the gathers as well. And we're sewing this at 1 centimetre. So we've sewn one side, go ahead and sew the other side. Right, so let's go to our overlocker and tidy those seams up. So now we're at the overlocker, we can do the hems tidying. So I've allowed 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch for the hem. There's certainly no problems if you wanted to do more, you'd find it really easy. You can do an overlock on the raw edge, turn up 1 centimetre and stitch. You could do a 5mm double fold if you don't want overlocking. I'm just going to simply serge the raw edge and turn up 1 centimetre and plain stitch it down. So because I'm at the overlocker now, I'm going to do the body hem and the sleeves hem overlocking as well. I'm now going to sew the hem into place on the body of the garment. I've already pressed it up by 1 centimetre to make it easier on myself. So 1 centimetre is 3/8 of an inch roundabout. So I'm just going to start this. Now I like to sew mine on the right side. You can certainly sew it from the wrong side if it's easier for you. When we stitch, we want to stitch through the overlocking line. Just hides it a little bit. And I've also got a stitch guide here on my faceplate. Don't forget to back tack. Okay, so we're nearly there. Let's just continue and sew the sleeve hems exactly the same way. When you start these, it's a good idea to start from the underarm point and just trim your thread back to around about an inch, a couple of centimetres, and then just tuck it under when you start sewing, and that will just hide that edge. Don't forget, when you've done one side, to go ahead and do the other side as well. There is a slight curve to create this butterfly effect on the sleeve, so it's not a direct straight line, so you might need to just be a little bit careful when you do sew this, so you don't get the tunnelling. Is it tunnelling? The wrinkling. Which is another good reason to press before you stitch. So there we are, all finished. Don't forget to go and give those hems a really good press. It just helps embed the stitches into the fabric. And thanks for joining me. If you like what you see, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and I hope to see you again soon for more videos.